Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our regularly scheduled Public Safety and Emergency Management Committee. Today is Wednesday, March 4th, 2020. My name is Alondra Cano, and I'm the council member of the 9th Ward and chair of this committee. We are joined by council members Jeremiah Ellison, council member Steve Fletcher, council member Philippe Cunningham, and council member Lene Palmisano. Together, we are a quorum of this committee and therefore can conduct the official business before us today. We have 4 items in the agenda. Item number 1 is a public comment. Item number 2 is a contract with the University of Minnesota Veterinary Medical Center for Police Canine Health Services. Item number 3 is a Women's Foundation of Minnesota grant for expenses related to the testing of sex assault exam kits. And item number 4 is a discussion item on a grant application to the U.S. Department of Justice for 2020 community-oriented policing services hiring. Are there any questions on the agenda today? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye. Aye. And item number 1 is public comment period. Anybody that's here from the community joining us today for a public comment regarding public safety issues, please feel free to come forward. Welcome.
Madam Chair, committee members, Chuck Turchik, I live in Phillips. 47 weeks ago, it was actually 6.5 weeks, but somehow 7 sounds better. One citizen brought forth a question to the Minneapolis Police Conduct Oversight Commission, a question conceived in a belief in transparency and dedicated to the proposition that the city ought to do what it says it's going to do, especially when it says that to the U.S. Department of Justice. That question was, what happened with the recommendations on MPD accountability procedures that came out of the Office of Justice Programs implementation committees? First asked on July 9th, 2018, that question has long endured. A great 20-month-long struggle for answers ensued. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it likely will not forget the absurdly inadequate or more accurately, non-response of the PCOC, the Minneapolis Police Department, the Mayor's Office, and this committee. Finally, Chair Cano's aide, Dylan Kesty, nobly advanced the ultimate end of this epic struggle when the MPD told him and Jennifer White of the Mayor's Office that answers would be forthcoming in January or February of 2020. That report supposedly will be issued soon, and I understand you may be getting a presentation on it too. We now here ought to highly to resolve that 20-month effort shall not have been in vain, that this city shall have a new birth of transparency, and that government responses to legitimate inquiries of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish merely because this solitary inquiry seemed to have generated a city response of, what the hell does he want now? We wish he'd go away already. Thank you, Councilmember Cano and Mr. Kestley, for finally pressuring those who needed to be pressured. Do I believe in miracles? Yes. Do I believe far more in struggle? Yes, yes. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did and it never will. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Seeing no other public comment, seeing no other people here for public comment, we shall receive and file this public comment period on public safety issues. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. The consent agenda is items 2 and 3. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda, please say aye. Aye. And now item number 4 is a discussion item on a grant application to the U.S. Department of Justice for the 2020 Community-Oriented Policing Services Hiring Grant. If we can please have the staff members who are here to present on this and walk us through this application, feel free to come up. I did want to note for the clerk that this power console is not working for me, and I've had issues with this before, so we might need to replace it. But please go ahead as soon as you all are ready.
Good morning, council members. Chair Khan, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today and address some questions and concerns regarding this COPS hiring grant. My name is Gio Valise, and I recently took over the Special Crimes Investigative Division, which includes domestic violence, sex crimes, traffic enforcement, the U visa, and many other. And for the past 2 months, I was asked to represent the MPD in this initiative, Vision Zero. I've been working hand-to-hand with Ethan from Public Works. I have learned a lot, and I do support and I believe in this initiative. So I'm going to quickly go over this, and please, I want to say that we welcome any feedback, any constructive criticism to enhance services for the community. The Minneapolis Police Department would like to submit a grant application in March 11 of 2020 to the United States Department of Justice for $1,250,000. This grant application will pay the salary and fringe benefits of about 10 new officers for about 3 years. If the city receives these grants here, the additional officers will support the Vision Zero program for the city of Minneapolis with the goal of reducing traffic deaths and injuries. Let me go to the next one, I apologize. One of the things that we're required to do if we accept the grant is that the MPD must retain all officers for at least 12 months and continue to pay the salary and the benefits. I believe that this is a great opportunity, council members, because if the officers are hired, they will support the City of Minneapolis Vision Zero. They will support the Vision Zero resolution. And I just want to quickly quote the Vision Zero resolution that I quoted. Is a commitment to Vision Zero. It's a commitment to life and equitable services for all the people in the City of Minneapolis, end quote. In turn, this is an opportunity to develop the traffic enforcement unit and support and partner. That's what we want to do. We want to support and partner with our Vision Zero task force. We are aware, the Minneapolis Police Department is aware that the loss of human life and fatal crashes is not acceptable. And we strongly believe that we can play a part in this. Just want to quickly rephrase some statistics that we received from the Department of from Public Works during the crash data study, that between 2007 and 2016, an average of 11 people died and 86 additional individuals were severely injured. Like I said, this is a great opportunity for Minneapolis to partner with Vision Zero Task Force in the reduction of traffic fatalities. We can play a role in improving traffic safety here with this opportunity, with this funding opportunity. And how we're going to do it is we're going to focus on the 5 most unsafe traffic behaviors. DW, driving under the influence of alcohol, speeding, distracted driving, red light running, and unsafe turning. We will focus based on these most common unsafe driving behaviors that have caused injuries and fatal accidents. The data-driven deployment, let me explain to you how we're going to do it. We're just not going to deploy at will and move into neighborhoods. We're going to be using data-driven deployment resources. We're going to look at the facts. We're going to look at statistics, and based also in community input and community feedback. That's where we're going to deploy the officers. And we believe that communities are in the best positions to tell the police department where do they need us to deliver the services. Another strategy that we'll use is we have put together an advisory working group, including members of the University of Minnesota. These are researchers who have worked in similar Vision Zero projects in the city of St. Paul. So we will emulate and use some of their best practices also. And a point that is important, council members, is that these best practices has a lot to do with community partnerships, deploying resources, deploying education, deploying engineering, but working hand to hand with community organizations. And equity is the goal. Equity is the goal of Vision Zero. We want to make sure that when we deliver any type of services is done, and I'm going to rephrase what the chief said before. When we develop programs, when we develop policies, we want to put as much fairness, if not greater than what's legal. What I'm trying to do is equity should be fair rather than focusing so much on what's legal. Fairness is important for any type of programs. How are we going to do that? We will continue to work in collaboration with the advisory board. We will continue to work in collaboration with communities, with internal and external organizations. And once again, I just want to remind that the University of Minnesota is one of the worldwide, actually nationwide right now, working in similar Vision Zero projects. So I'm so honored that they're coming on board and they'll be working with us. We will make sure that officers who are selected to be part of the Vision Zero initiative are given the proper tools, the proper knowledge, the proper education. That is our goal, to do more. Our intention is to do more good than harm in these communities, especially when we know that injuries and fatalities take place in marginalized communities. I'm going to pause for now. I think I'm going too fast, and I'm going to ask Director McPherson to talk a little bit about the budget and line items. But if you have any questions, I'll be here. Yeah.
Thank you. Committee Chair Cano, council members, many of you know that this is not the first COPS grant that we've applied for. We've had these before over a period of at least the last 6 or 7 years. But the COPS grant has not been available for the last several years, about the last 3 years. And so they came out with a new one this year in mid to late January. And it's the same situation as in prior years, where they pay a portion of an officer in certain areas. And we were fortunate enough this year to realize that one of those areas was with traffic safety and community policing. This is a new area for them. This has not been allowed in the past. And the way the COPS grant works is that you hire 10 officers, they defray up to $125,000 per officer over a 36-month period, and the agency is responsible for the remaining balance of the salaries in there. So if you look at the spreadsheet, PowerPoint above, you'll see that the total amount of the grant request is $1.2 million, $1,250,000, and that would make the MPD's required match for salary and fringe is the $2.2 million, so the second and third line on the spreadsheet to the far right. If we were to make this into a traffic unit, which is the proposal here, one, we think that if we are going to put a traffic unit together, we're leveraging federal dollars to do that. We know that there has been community and council request to do traffic enforcement as long as it's been done equitably and based on behaviors, which is what we're proposing. So the costs that are below those three lines are the additional costs that would be required to put together a program for traffic safety. You'll notice that in the first column to the left, what we're assuming is, because of the way the COPS grant works and the hiring time and dates of the grant itself, we are assuming that we would not have any reimbursable costs until mid-2021. So the first column on here is actually for only half a year, from basically July 1st to 12/31. And then the second and third year on this are full years, and then the fourth year is a half a year of expense. There is a requirement on the COPS grant because the thrust of the COPS grant is to hire in public safety. That's basically the main thrust of this grant for the federal government. And so the requirement is that each agency would retain those additional officers for a 12-month period. Those ongoing costs to do that would be approximately $1.3 million. So the items below, again, we've tried to include all those tails that sometimes, people tend to miss, including the cost to hire, the workstations, squads. Everything is in there so that we can see what the true cost would be to the city. So are there any financial questions or questions about how the grant works itself?
Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Cano. So the funding is for 3 years, which is what's represented here, but then we're obligated to maintain that staffing level for a fourth year. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Which is not indicated on this spreadsheet. So
It-
there's an additional,
That's why I have a note on the bottom that says ongoing annual costs are $1.3 million.
but that's not part of the 3.352.
That is
our
correct.
NPD
Yes,
total.
you're
So
correct.
so the total that we would be committing to would be 4.6.
Yeah,
Okay, thanks.
that's correct.
Great. And then just to be clear, when they say we need to retain these officers, they don't mean these 10. They mean a total sworn officer staffing level 10 higher than what we currently have. So we would be committing basically the next council term to a minimum of 898 sworn officers.
That is correct. It's an FTE count. So just a couple of more points too regarding this. Our request is to apply. This is to actually turn the application in. It is not to accept a grant award. We have no way of knowing if we would receive an award or not. We know that there has not been a COPS grant for, like I said, 3 years. And so, what they're using for criteria, we don't know. But again, this is for purely putting in the application. And I know that there's been discussion about, well, what happens if you apply and you get it? Can we turn it back? Things like that. And we can turn it back. And we have said in the past, and I still agree with this, that if you get an award and you start using it and then you turn it back, that's a problem. If you get an award and you decide not to use it and you have a legitimate reason, I'm comfortable with sending a letter back and saying, this is our reason, and it's a very clear-cut reason on why we're not accepting or using the award. But again, this is for the application process, not for the grant acceptance. Any questions?
Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Cano. When is the grant deadline?
The application deadline is March 11th.
Has the grant application been prepared?
We're in the process of preparing it right now. Legal has already looked at it. That was one of the concerns when this came out. We wanted to make sure that we weren't requesting anything or a signature that the city would not endorse. And so Mr. Nelson has reviewed it, or one of his people have reviewed it, and they are fine with all the certifications that are required.
And so the intention is to use this potential funding and/or potential new sworn officers to create a traffic unit. Is that correct?
Traffic enforcement, yes.
Traffic enforcement unit. All right. Thank you.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for this information. What is the timeline for hiring folks into these positions? Because I see that the reimbursable expenses will start in next July. So when are we looking to actually put folks in the positions?
These people would probably, if I had to make an estimate, these people would probably be hired in January, February timeframe would count for that. We usually, in the past, have not tried to get reimbursement until after they have finished their training and become sworn officers. That's just a little more conservative approach because this is a very difficult grant to administer. And if you have dropouts and things like that or turnover or everything, it's very difficult to follow 10 positions. You're not really following 10 people. You're following 10 positions. And so we usually do wait until the people have finished the training before we ask.
So thank you for that. So we're assuming then that these 10 are going to come out of the recruit class?
Yes.
Kind of what we're assuming?
Yes.
Okay.
They would, and let me preface that also.
Sure.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
The 10 people who would be in the traffic enforcement would not be brand new people. Again, we have to think in terms of position.
Right.
So we're hiring an additional 10, but the people who would be going into this position would be existing officers because you can't put 10 brand new officers in something like this.
Sure,
So-
that's fair. Thank you for that clarification. Just going back to the $4.6 million that we would then have to pay after 4 year 4.5, I think is, so then the 12 months after that. But even before that, by accepting this grant, are we then committing to the 3.5 million?
That's a really great question. We're not committing to the dollar amount. The only dollar amount we commit to is the match of the $2.2 million in the grants itself. What the numbers I have down here below is if we do this as a traffic enforcement. So the one thing we are committed to is the way we have to fill out the grant application is it has to be for a specific program. So we would have to keep them in a traffic enforcement position, for that period of time of the grant. You can get them out of that, but it's very difficult to do, and they don't always approve that, so.
If I may, Madam Chair. So with this, with the 2.2 or the 3.5 altogether, would there then be a budget request later on to actually go through the budget process of allocating this in a more official way?
That would be my suggestion, to do it in that way. I have passed this on to the budget department, the city budget department, so they're aware of what the whole situation is. But yes, it would be a change request for the additional funds.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Ellison.
Thank you. So I have a few concerns. One is logistical. We're sort of having this budget conversation outside of the typical budget process. I think that we have a really robust and transparent budgeting process that a lot of people participate in. Public safety is one of those issues that constituents and residents of the city have a lot of opinions on. And so I am concerned that we sort of are locking ourselves in, or I guess there's some wiggle room, but it feels like we're potentially locking ourselves into a budgetary ask outside of the normal budgeting process. And there's a little bit of discomfort that I have with that. The other is, I guess you could say, slightly philosophical, which is that increasing our sworn officer amount is another sort of hot issue that a lot of constituents have a lot of opinions about. And so it feels like right after we've had, it's pretty still early in the year, right after we've had this debate about whether to increase our sworn officer count or to keep it at 88. Right after that, we sort of kind of have this way to just backfill and say, okay, we've outside of the debate, we've now raised it by 10 officers, and that feels a little bit not intentionally, non-transparent. I get that this is like not speaking to anybody's intention at all, but it just feels like not the best way to have that discussion either. And so I do get that you guys are coming up against a deadline. I have a lot of faith that, we've got great professional staff. You all know what you're doing. And so I'm pretty confident we'd probably get this grant, just because you guys are such great professionals and you know what you're doing. But it does feel, but I am uncomfortable sort of with just the timing of how this is happening, both on the budget amount and the fact that we're going to be raising our sworn officer count without a real public discussion.
Can I go first? Can I go first? I think you bring up a lot of good points. A couple of things is the cops hiring grant, as I said, has not been around for 3 years. And normally, frankly, it's usually later in the year. So it does become part of the budget process in many respects, because it's usually not happening until May and June timeframe. So just kind of at the beginning. The fact that it's coming now is, unfortunately, we didn't have anything to do with that. That was just the whim of somebody, at the federal level. I guess I just want to reiterate that this is the application process. And so there is time for discussion after the application process, when some of the other information that we're looking at right now can be discussed. So it is the application process. It is not the acceptance process.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Ellison, I appreciate your comments on that, and I know that other elected officials have brought that to my attention, and I agree with you that the timing, something that we did not control, but I know that as governance officials, you have always wanted to make sure that community have been included in those conversations, and so if I can apologize for the federal government, it just kind of came up and did not allow all of you as governance leaders to really fully engage in that. Part of this is also, of course, connected to Commander Valise, where some of our elected officials have asked, specifically related to Vision Zero, to have some resources available to really concentrate on that. As chief right now, we just don't have the capacity, if we were just right now based on what we have, to really engage in that. And so, as Director McPherson said, really focused on the application process. I know that there's also some very important studies that are being embarked upon, and if it should come back, that information can better help inform us regarding this, and we need to disengage with this grant. We certainly we have the flexibility to do that as well. But I absolutely take to heart your concerns about the timing and the public conversation.
Yeah, did you have a follow-up question? Okay.
I think because of the timing issues and just knowing how much of a public discussion these types of issues do become, I'd almost feel like, as hard as it would be to pass up $1.25 million. I mean, since we're looking at potentially over a 5-year period, putting in upwards of $7 million into it anyway ourselves, right? That's outside of the 1.5. I'd almost just feel like if this is something that we needed, I think that's, and I think, and there's a potential that it really is. We're doing a staffing study right now that I think that's really going to clarify and help us make some decisions come budget season. But I'd almost be more comfortable, sort of saying, well, the city will just pay for this program if we feel like it's necessary, and we won't go for this grant. But it's not quite free money. The city is signing up for to put a lot of money on the table. Again, it seems like upwards of $7 million over the next 5 years, because it would be the 3.35 in the first 4, and then we'd have to sort of deliver the whole 4.6 after in the 5th year, right?
No.
Okay.
Okay. The total. You're right. The total commitment, if you talk the 3 years plus the next year, the 4th year basically, or the next 12 months after the 3 years. So it would really be $4.6 million that we're on. Still a significant number. Don't get me wrong, but
Sure.
Definitely not the 7 or 8 million.
Okay. Sorry, I misunderstood that.
No.
I'm not fully comfortable having those two discussions, I think, right now. And I think that, and I do think that the sworn officer count, especially raising it to 898, I think that the public's going to hear that we're discussing that and say, whoa, we are way outside of a transparent process here. So just wanted to reiterate that. But I think your all points are well taken, and I get that the timing of this has nothing to do with the city or the department. So. But thank you.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Cano. When will we likely get a decision about whether we receive the grant or not? Can you talk us through the timing on that?
It's Councilmember Fletcher. It's a little bit of a guess, but I would anticipate. August to September, probably mid-August. They've been delayed before. They're never early. But my guess would be August to September timeframe.
Okay, and then how long would we have to respond? So it just feels like as early as this is happening.
Wendy, is it like 30 days or something? 30 days. Okay.
But it's still not likely to be part of our formal budget process.
It would be the beginning of it, but it wouldn't be into December or November timeframe. It would probably be for sooner than that, wouldn't you think, Wendy? But we received it later, the solicitation. Yeah, I think it would be probably not into December, so something less than that.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. I'll let my colleague speak.
Councilmember Palmisano. Oh, I'm sorry about that. Your mug. Okay, apologies. I will do Councilmember Cunningham first, followed by Councilmember Palmisano.
Sorry about that, Madam Chair. My flag was behind my mug, so she couldn't see it. So as I'm sure you all know, I have been a vocal supporter of traffic enforcement, equitable traffic enforcement, because we do have very serious road safety issues in my ward. At the end of last year, in addition to the the staffing study, we also established a work group around traffic enforcement division reestablishment, so there's the 5 behaviors, but then what strategies are we going to do? What kind of measurements are there going to be? How are we truly going to integrate this? So I'm a little bit concerned that that wasn't acknowledged while talking about that, because that's going to be really critical work in helping to support the rollout of this. And I just wanted to name my concerns around. I know the timing wasn't our fault, right? Like I acknowledge that and recognize that, but I do have some discomfort with it happening outside so quickly and outside of a more transparent process before we have the information that we need to make a truly informed decision, even if it's just applying, right? Like I understand that we're not in the conversation of accepting the grant yet, but one of the concerns that I have are a couple fold. Like the first is that we don't have the work group, the recommendations back yet, which are going to be really critical in helping to set the protective factors around exasperating racial disparities in traffic enforcement. And so I really would like for us to be able to go into this fully informed about that. Further, around the staffing study, we don't know if 898 is the magical number, and I think we're kind of a little bit operating under the assumption that the study's going to come back with recommendations of increasing the amount of authorized sworn officers. So when it could maybe not, and so. So I think it would just be harder for us to try to take that back. Like if we just recently did an increase, I think that would just be a harder process for us to try to take that back. And then the last thing that I just want to express concern around is the reason why I feel like it's important for us to have this conversation right now around the application rather than the acceptance, is I'm just concerned about us having negative implications with our relationship with the DOJ, with them going through the process of evaluating, then saying, yep, you're a good fit for it. And then we're like, actually, we didn't quite have our ducks in a row, so never mind, we're not going to accept it. You know what I mean? So like, I don't know if you have a response to any of those things, but I just wanted to express that. So let's say the staffing study comes back and is like, actually, we don't think that there should be a traffic enforcement division, or the recommendations actually from the work group is we actually don't think it should be a division. We think that all officers should be trained around good practices of traffic enforcement. What then, I guess, would be my question.
Yeah, no, Councilmember Cunningham, I think I would agree with you, except for the fact that the staffing study is a third-party study. If it was an internal study, or if it was just kind of I don't want to say whim, but just kind of the thought at the time type thing, then I would totally agree with you. But the fact that it's a third party that comes in, I think that we have a very legitimate reason for saying we are being fiscally responsible and fiscally prudent, because the staffing study comes in and says we only need 100 officers, okay? And we can point to that and say that's our rationale. I think goes a long ways to creating or disabusing the federal government that we just did this on a whim. We have better information. We're reporting to a third party, and so I that to me is a real legitimate reason for going back at that point in time. I can't address the other one. So.
Did you have anything?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, no, your points are well taken. I would just, and I know it's difficult to, because it's holistic, everything that all of you as governance leaders are thinking of. Yet there's still this very clear process piece and then the outcome piece. And so, again, I stand before you to say in terms of the process piece, I still believe that there is the ability for us to those absolutely the studies are very important. They will better help inform us. But from a process piece, it's like with deadline, if we may not have this opportunity again. We still have the opportunity again if it comes back after the studies are completed and we realize that we are either adequately staffed or overstaffed. We still have that ability to draw back. And then, of course, too, any sort of traffic concerns that you may have or others may have in terms of having some sort of traffic behavior team out there. Again, capacity-wise right now, we just would not be able to fulfill that right now. So those are all the considerations that I take into it. So, yeah.
We'll go with Councilmember Palmisano, followed by Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A number of things I'd like to comment on about things that my colleagues have said. The first is about timing and about partnership. I think that we don't achieve big city goals in isolation. We can't be looking at MPD and saying they're not here at the perfect time yet, so we can't allow them to go through with applying for some extra money. I think that it's too bad that sequentially in our legislative calendar this cycle we cannot do this after the press conference next week that will share Public Works' enormous efforts on our Vision Zero initiative. But specifically, and already known to the public, we will be reducing speed limits across the city. And MPD is an important partner in that Vision Zero effort. They are not leading it, but they are an important partner on these 5 things that Public Works has been telling us all along: red light running, speeding, unsafe turning, driving under the influence, and distracted driving. There's a robust staff direction, thanks to Councilmember Cunningham. In last year's budget, I had an opportunity to speak one-on-one with Commander Valise about it this morning. I think that it's really important what our commander said in his presentation about selecting the right officers for this effort. This is what we want. I see that acknowledged in all the one-on-one conversations. This funding would not start until next July. All and any recommendations that will come from this robust staff direction have time to be incorporated or taken into account before anything like this would even start. But I don't believe that Public Works can effectively implement Vision Zero without a partnership of some sort with MPD, and I want to acknowledge that's going to take more work to get to the end of it. But what are our alternatives here? I mean, I get arguments about police funding versus investing in other things in our city, versus investing in housing, versus youth investments, other competing priorities. But this application is a way to not compete against those other things and to be able to create, not increase the capacity of our police department to do traffic enforcement, but to create the ability of our police department to do traffic enforcement. We can't make a practice of rejecting any opportunity to acquire potential resources anytime it's inconvenient to us. And this is not this isn't just about MPD, this is about any department in our city. In fact, we tell departments that they have to get creative when they come to the budget table. They have to get creative when they come to the mayor's office and say, how are you going to contribute to this next budget ask that you have? And now the application to maybe get some money has shown up on a timeline that we're just now going to hold the police department to. I think we should be saying, hey, thanks for thinking outside the box here, MPD. That's how I feel about the timing of this. In terms of process, one example of budget process improvement from the past that I think MPD has made is that we're seeing this now instead of just the acceptance of this, which has happened in the past. When grants come in from all departments, not just MPD, with tails like this. And there is a tail here, and that's one of the items of consideration. This is a practice we want across all departments, is to come before we go and apply for a grant. This one came up kind of quickly. We have a really short timeline. But here's another example as to why this is an improvement from the past. Retrofitting this in later gets messy. Here is a motion from the 2018 budget deliberations when Councilmember Fry and Councilmember Bender had to retrofit in the approval, the tails, so to speak, of a COPS grant. They had to reduce the ongoing appropriation in reg services for nighttime mobility by almost $500,000. They had to reduce the police community safety liaisons for $68,000 and eliminate an FTE from that program. Those are not the kinds of things we want to do. We want to be doing those kinds of things more in our city. And we had to make that tough decision to try and get it or keep the funding from the COPS grant that we had agreed on in the past. So I don't see this as being problematic. I see this as being transparent by the police department. I think that next week we will hear more about the kind of lift that it's going to take to make Vision Zero a success in our city, and MPD is an important partner in that effort. Thank you.
All righty. We have Councilmember Jenkins, followed by Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I am really, concerned about some of the very items that my colleagues have identified. Process, moving it outside of the budget cycle to, potentially create a significant increase to our budget. That being said, in political life, opportunities don't always fall on our desired timelines. It would be really great if everything did kind of line up the way we would like it to, and we can have enough time to really deliberate about issues and concerns. But the reality is that that's not the reality. I mean, things change in political life on a dime. And as policymakers, we have the tough role of being able to recognize that and then make decisions within that context. While I am deeply concerned about the process, I'm deeply concerned that, when we hear from our constituents about issues, one of the most potent and important ones is public safety. And I think on both sides of the issue as it stands. And I think we have to move with this innovative approach to see if this is going to be an opportunity for us to increase safety on our roads in the years to come. It's a very important issue in my community. In fact, it's probably the number one issue that I hear about. I know it has been exacerbated by the reconstruction of 35W and all of the other traffic projects that are occurring throughout our city, and particularly in the 8th Ward. Those things aren't going to change anytime soon. The Vision Zero study is, we're reducing our speed limits. How are we going to enforce that without, a dedicated traffic enforcement unit to be able to monitor and pursue those efforts? At the same time, going back to the initial presentation, we have to have equity in that process. It cannot just be a continuation of what we know has historically and not just with MPD, but, throughout our country, the targeting of black and brown drivers for under the guise of enforcement. And so we really need to have a significant plan for how those issues are going to be addressed going forward. Just wanted to share some of my thoughts. Thank you.
Chair, if I could, I'd like to address your last concern, Councilmember Jenkins. And I've been part on numerous Vision Zero committee meetings and in discussion with Ethan, and have expressed those very concerns to him. And I've said from day one that our participation in Vision Zero has to be rooted in legitimacy, and that whatever our role as the MPD has to be viewed by the public as being legitimate and being what the public wants from us in regards to traffic safety. And I want to be clear that although we don't want to mince words and not call it a traffic enforcement unit, because that's what it is. I don't want to get into euphemisms that appear to make something seem what it isn't. But what it really is about addressing unsafe behaviors. And that isn't always about citations and arrests. That also comes a lot into education and partnership. And I want to be very clear that I have, in my conversations with Commander Valise and the Chief, is that I want this to be done in partnership with our stakeholders, and about data, and about unsafe behaviors, and about helping to correct unsafe behaviors. And a kind of a 10,000-foot view, how I would envision this is that we would work with Ethan in Vision Zero. They would identify perhaps there's a location that is it leads the list in people being injured or killed because of, and perhaps the behavior that's doing it is unsafe turning. People are just not watching the crosswalks. They're not doing something that's causing an inordinate amount of pedestrians or bicyclists to be injured or hit. And that there isn't anything, or maybe in conjunction with some design change, we can be a part of that. I would like, from a position of legitimacy, to come at that with our first phase is that we go through the media or through different things saying, we're going to be in this area doing this. There's unsafe behaviors. We're going to be in this area doing this, followed by a layer of warnings. Perhaps when we have our interactions, we're warning people about that. And then utilizing citations or what people consider traditional enforcement as really the last layer of something. We want behavior change. We're not looking to write numbers of citations. We're not looking to have some sort of disparate impact on people, but we're looking to partner in the best way that we can to address the unsafe behaviors and make it safer for people.
Madam Chair.
We have two more comments. I want to make sure that the council members get to speak. Can you be brief? Okay.
Madam Chair, to our council members, the other thing I just wanted to say, if this were to we were able to accept this grant, one of the advantages I think we have going on today, unlike we did when we dissolved the traffic unit back in 2012, we will have much more informed data. There will be studies that come out. I think we have a very in-tuned governance set of elected officials who are talking very much about equity and fairness, racial disparities. We have data now that will help drive and inform us in terms of how that works. And of course, the collaboration between the advisory folks and again, letting our communities lead us into where they want this service and how they want this service to be done. So if this were to occur, I feel much better today as chief knowing that what we had back in 2012 is very different than what we would have moving forward today. And I think that that goodwill, the data, the collaborations with our communities would help us have the type of traffic behavior team that we would want. So,
Thank you. Councilmember Fletcher and Councilmember Ellison.
Thank you, Chair Cano. So I'll just say I want to really reinforce what Council Vice President Jenkins said, that one of the questions that we have to resolve is around racial equity, and I've been asking for over a year for a study on racial disparities in traffic enforcement that we still have not seen, and I will certainly not be in a position to vote for something that funds traffic enforcement while we don't have answers to that question, because it's very important to me that whatever we do moving forward is not amplifying that disparity because I'm not interested in investing into inequity, which is what the data currently identifies. And you're absolutely right that having access to that data helps us figure out what we need to fix. But I haven't heard yet a theory about how do we fix it and what does that look like other than shifting geography, which is not a sufficient answer to me. I want to see the study. So that's one of the things that that's on the table here. It is not just the staffing study. It is also that, in the last budget cycle, which it feels like the ink barely dried on, getting that budget done, we came together as the 13 of us and we made a very clear compromise with the mayor's office that addressed staffing levels, that got a recruit class filled that was badly needed, and that also addressed some of the concerns that people on this council had about and that people in the community had about staffing moving forward, to say we want to try to make this conversation make more sense. And one of the things that we did is we created a couple of processes, and those processes haven't had a chance to do their work. So we haven't seen the racial disparity study. We haven't seen the task force do its work about how traffic enforcement needs to work in our city to know whether we need 10 officers. I'll just say, as if you take a basic economy class, right, people will tell you if you see something that's on sale for 20% off, which is basically what we're talking about here, right, because we have to put in 80% of the money. If it was something you were going to buy anyway, then that's a good deal. If it entices you to buy something that you wouldn't have bought, it probably blows your budget. And it's not a good idea to buy stuff just because it's on sale. And we are trying to create a much better process so that we're not just yelling at each other about police staffing. We're trying to actually do the work and do the studies and do this in a smart way so that we can move forward with some intentionality and move forward together so that we don't feel like we're at odds. And this sort of jumps the queue on all of that. And so I think whenever we get a proposal, and I do want to agree with Councilmember Palmisano that this level of transparency about the tails and the budget presentation of this grant is better than a lot of what we see in a lot of departments. And I want to acknowledge that I really appreciate. I just think that it isn't ready yet in terms of some processes that we set up that are not things I'm willing to negotiate on, because we just did negotiate on them in December to get to a place that we have those processes in place. And so I think, reading my colleagues, I'm going to go ahead and make a motion to return to staff. And recognizing that means that will mean that we miss this deadline. But I also do want to acknowledge, just for context for my colleagues, and I think this is important, the COPS deadlines used to be more frequent. They haven't been available for a couple of years because there was a lawsuit that held them up. And the reason there was a lawsuit is that the federal government tried to deny funds to the city of Los Angeles based on their sanctuary city status. And so I think it's a good moment as a part of this motion to recognize, first of all, that we expect the deadlines to come more frequently given that the lawsuit's been resolved. But second of all, it's important for us to affirm that we are unapologetically a sanctuary city and that we're going to have some of the same issues with the federal government in this grant process that Los Angeles and other cities have had. So I'll move to return to staff, and with the spirit of, I want you to continue to look for money. I want you to continue to do this work, and I do want you to bring it back if and when we get to a point that we've identified a need and we've identified a strategy and we've identified a way that this fits into a plan that we've worked on together.
Did you want to speak on his motion?
Yeah, I'll be supporting the motion to return this to staff, and just say, I do want to acknowledge that I appreciate when you all are bringing this to us, aside, federal government deadlines aside, and I also appreciate Chief and DC4's sort of the very, I know we're not in the weeds yet, but the very high, top level sort of broad view of how theoretically we would engage enforcement in a way to address some of those issues. That's important. I think it's important for the community to hear that. It's important for me to hear that as a council member. So thank you for that. And I also just want to say, this is not, non-competitive, right? These funds, we would have to put forward 80% of the money here. And so we are still talking about our budget and these funds sort of competing with other priorities. And when I say that, when I talk about timeline and how this is coming out, I'm not opposed to sort of the timing for the sake of being opposed to the timing. I think that, I think we had a discussion 2 months ago about, 2.5 months ago about where we were going to put our priorities and where we were going to put our money. As Councilmember Fletcher said, we invested a lot of money into making sure that we can get to that 888 because there were some projections that we were going to fall well below that. And I think that we owe it to folks to not say, all right, we've put in our investment to get to the 888, and now we're sort of just very quickly raising the staffing levels. And so I think that my issue is not timing for timing's sake, but, again, the transparency issue and how we're having this discussion with community, I think is really important. But with that, I'll end my comments and I will be supporting the motion before us.
Yep, so we have a motion before us that was made by Councilmember Fletcher to return this to staff to do further work, and we have a comment we have Councilmember Palmisano in the queue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Returning to staff something like this would be highly unusual, I think, and I think that this is unfortunately an attempt to just kill it in committee so that it can't go and get weighed in on by all council members. Clearly, returning it to committee is making that decision for the entire council to say, no, absolutely not, we won't, and we're not willing to bring it through the rest of the process. So I would urge my colleagues to allow this to fail in committee, but to still go to full council so that we can both have the public presentation of the Vision Zero study and where we're at in it next week, and then be mindful of that as we get to vote as a full council next Friday. So I urge my colleagues to not support this motion to kill it.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I'm of the mind that we are in some really challenging times. And the Minneapolis Police Department, our firefighters, all of us are first responders in times of crisis. We have a perception of a lack of public safety in the city of Minneapolis, and whether that is real or not, it is certainly a perception. We have what I think is undue pressure from our state legislators to provide more public safety in the city of Minneapolis, to the extent that they have recently introduced a bill to require us to spend our LGA funding or a portion of it on public safety. Who knows where that is going? The point is that there is significant concern about public safety in the city of Minneapolis. I started out talking about the first responders, and we have essentially a pandemic happening in our city or in our country, in the world. And I think we rely on our first responders to help us deal with those kinds of issues. While this grant won't necessarily produce more police officers in the immediate time, it does send a signal that we are concerned about the public safety in our communities. And so, in that spirit, I will be voting no against the current motion, and I believe we need to give all of our colleagues an opportunity to be a part of this conversation.
Thank you. Are you okay? Yes. All right. Councilmember Cunningham.
I have a question, actually. What is our current staffing levels, and what do we project for them to be by the end of the year?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, I'm going to lean towards Dr. McPherson, but I believe we are at 887, roughly? Perhaps 882 currently. Our next dividend from the recruit class will occur in December, and that number is approximately 30. Apologize. If I had to guesstimate, probably about 30.
Actually 35.
35.
Plus whatever in August, so it'll actually be higher than that.
So 882, and in December we'd have a class coming out approximately 35.
We have a class in August as well.
Yeah.
So, and that'll be approximately 36 to 38 people as well.
And that class will come out at the top of 2021.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. The August class or that December?
The August class should come out right around December, January.
January, yeah, of 2021. Yeah.
I thought our staffing levels were much lower than that. Did we recently do a big hire?
That doesn't include attrition on it too, so you could almost take one of those classes out as attrition.
That's what I was wondering, because I was like, usually it's a lot lower than that.
I'm
so
sorry, I usually look that up before I come.
no, that's okay. Just because we're talking about staffing levels, right? And so I just like it's helpful to know kind of, do we even need to increase the authorized amount if we're going to be within the 888 with attrition and the recruit class? So I'm just trying to also get an understanding of that. So
I'm sorry.
could you come to the microphone? Yeah.
Councilmember Cunningham, if I remember correctly, and Councilmember Fletch, you may remember this better than I do, but if I remember correctly, the end of the year, we were still below the 888. That was the projection. And I haven't seen anything that would necessarily change that in total. And it really wasn't until next year that we reached the 888 amount. So is that what you're remembering too?
Councilmember Fletcher is interested in talking.
My recollection is that it gets confusing because we separate out the recruit class now from the numbers. So it kind of depends on, are we talking about total sworn officers, or are we talking about who's in the field? And those numbers often get confusing. But my recollection is that we were going to overshoot 888 by late December when that December class, that we were going to briefly sort of peak in staffing in December and January, and then assume that attrition would.
Yeah, and I'd be
bring it
happy
back
to
down
do a
to
projection for you too and get you all that information.
Thank you. I'd appreciate that.
Righty. Seeing no other questions or comments, we have a motion before us made by Councilmember Fletcher to send this back to the staff. All those in favor of that motion, please say aye. Aye. All those against, please say nay. All right. So that is moving forward. All those abstaining? All of those in, looks like our motion moves forward.
Madam Chair, that wasn't clear to me because I didn't hear you vote. Could we have asked for a roll call on that?
Yeah, I voted in favor to send it back to the staff, and I heard 3 voices on that. But we can do a voice roll call
If I may, Madam Chair, I just have a procedural question about that for our city clerk. On a motion like this, which would be to return to staff, a 3-3 vote fails. Was it 3-3? Was it 2-4? I think we should have a roll call vote, and then I'm curious to hear from our city clerk. If it is 3-3, I'd like to hear from the city clerk as to what happens with that, because my understanding is that fails.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so let's go ahead and do a roll call, because I heard 3 voices for sure. We'll take a vote again on this motion to send back to the staff. So all those in favor of...
the clerk to call a roll.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Ellison.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Jenkins.
Nay.
Palmisano.
Nay.
Chair Kano.
Aye.
There are 4 ayes and 2 nays.
So then, Madam Chair, my second question.
So that motion moves forward, and without further business before us, we are adjourned. Thank you so much.